In this fast moving world of economics, we often fail to consult the past. Going through a crisis, it's important to look back once in a while, take a thing or two from the crises that ravaged us before, and put them to use. History remains constant even when our social, political, and economic environment changes. It's an excellent guide through everything. And today, we'll be looking at one such crisis and hopefully learn from it. It all began during the Roaring Twenties, a period of extreme economic, social, and technological progression in the United States. New inventions like the motor car, vacuum cleaners, and even telephones ushered in this new era. The country saw its national wealth double over just 9 years. More people started to buy these things. Supply and demand increased equally, funding the economy. In this period, the average businessman got paid more, and that meant the average worker got paid more. Since workers had more spending power, thousands turned to the stock market to invest their hard earned money. And in absolutely no time, millions of people started to buy these stocks. Some mortgaged their houses, some took out loans just to be a part of this Wall Street frenzy. It was a blissful time, full of profit for the average worker and the businessman. But no one could have predicted the events that were about to unfold. The investments reached their peak in September of 1929. From a mere 63 points in 1921, the Dow Jones Index had skyrocketed up to an astounding 381 points in just 8 years. This had been an 8 years of high quality of life, technological innovation, and economic prosperity. The stock market crashed on Thursday, October 24th, 1929. This was because millions of investors bought stocks at an unprecedented rate. Several companies miscalculated their stock price and lowered their production and started to cut wages. As soon as this happened, the average wage of a worker began to go down. Less disposable income meant they could buy less stocks, and the loans and mortgages they had taken out, well, with the rising interest rates, millions of people defaulted on these loans. Even though all of this was going on, the stock market seemed relatively healthy. Hitting peak after peak, no one saw anything wrong. A small crash wasn't enough to deter anyone from investing. But several professional investors realized that something was up. Headlines such as "Wall Street in Panic" as stocks crash started to appear in newspapers. And as soon as the Dow opened on the fateful day on October 24th, 1929, a colossal liquidation of assets took place. 12 million shares were sold in just one day. Dow Jones fell 11% on that one day alone. This selling happened so fast that prices couldn't be recorded by the machines used to process that data. This was monumental. In another week, on October 29th, the Dow Jones Index fell another 12%. 16.4 million shares were sold on this day, the highest ever recorded. A record $14 billion were lost in just a single day. The Dow Jones entered freefall and lost 90% of its entire estimated value in just 3 years. Now, companies have shut down. There's no money to fund them. Since the companies have shut down, there's no place for people to work. Because of the money lost by banks with defaulted loans, there was absolutely no place for people to get any money from. 24.9%. That's how high the unemployment rate was. Even if there were people still holding money, a lack of monetary confidence didn't want to make them buy anything. President Hoover's response was barely a response. Asking companies to do their best to sustain themselves without government intervention was a failure of a method. Simultaneously raising taxes, this cost their country 12% of its already depleting GDP. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act was passed in 1930. This act led to probably the most devastating time in recorded human history. The act increased tariffs on imports, making it harder for countries to sell to the United States. One country which was affected majorly by this act was Germany. Already facing severe recession due to losing in World War I and bad investments in the United States, Germany was at the brink of social collapse. This allowed Adolf Hitler to rise to power, start the Third Reich, and begin World War II. In 1932, 10,000 banks have failed since the beginning of the Depression. Massive food riots have broken out, and unemployment is at 23%. November 8th was when Franklin D. Roosevelt was announced as the new President of the United States. Under his watch, the New Deal was created. The New Deal was supposed to get the United States out of this recession. 15 new laws were added. Bank holidays, the Emergency Banking Act, the Federal Emergency Relief Act, and Agricultural Adjustment Act were put into place. Along with this, the United States moved off of the gold standard, and public projects such as the Tennessee dams were funded. Also, the Federal Security Act was put into place to regulate the stock market. Later that year, the SEC was formed to protect that act, and 1933 ends with the economy slowly rising up. In 1934, Roosevelt stood strong with his economic reform. The United States saw a glimpse of hope with his revolutionary changes. And a year later, perhaps the most integral changes were made. The Second New Deal introduced gigantic public projects, such as the interstate highways, now valued at over $3.4 trillion. Not all was looking up though. 1935 also saw the Dust Bowl. Hitting the Midwestern United States, the dust storms took the life of livestock and people. They ruined fields and made the country run dry on food. This set back the economy as people had to pay extra to access food and water. This also ruined the local economy of the Midwest and prompted a mini recession which ended soon on its own. In 1936, because of the success of the Second New Deal, unemployment had shrunk to a mere 16%. And a year later, in 1937, Roosevelt was re-elected as the President of the United States. And with the Social Security Act constitutionalized, the hopes of American citizens started to grow. A rising threat in the East, Germany and much of Europe was at war. The United States condemned Germany's actions and started to mobilize the war effort, pouring millions into the research and development for new military technology. Funded by war bonds, this was a surefire way to end the Depression. And on June 6, 1944, US troops stormed France seeking to end the war. The war effort back home saw women and children working to pump the economy back to its original form, working on making tanks, airplanes, guns, and bullets. They led social change in that era. And soon, by the late 1940s, the Depression finally ends. The Great Depression ravaged the United States in the early 20th century. It's regarded as the worst financial crisis of all time. It began in 1929 and lasted for about 2 decades. It's left behind a legacy which has helped shape modern economics. We learned a lot from this recession. It displayed the power of the consumer, how costly our mistakes are, how the stock market is not representative of the actual social condition of a country. We learned that, in the end, greed and fear overpower any rational thought. The recession's ending led to another crisis' beginning. But for struggling through all of that, we were introduced to several acts to protect our money and to prevent anything like this from happening again. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation and Security Exchange Commission helped regulate the stock market. The Social Security Act helped struggling Americans by creating welfare for them. Interstate project allowed for people to travel easier, making life a bit like how it was before the crisis. Removal from the gold standard also boosted the United States economic capital, essentially making it the next superpower. These acts, policies, and commissions helped bring the United States and the world to where we stand now.